After just 3 minutes of combat, HMS Hood explodes in the frigid North Atlantic, leaving only 3 survivors out of 1,418 sailors. The culprit, a single German battleship on her first mission. In London, Prime Minister Winston Churchill, face flushed with anger, gives one simple 6-word order: sink the Bismarck at all costs. Within hours, the Royal Navy mobilizes its largest hunting force ever: 6 battleships, 2 aircraft carriers, 13 cruisers, and 21 destroyers, all pursuing a single target. At 50,000 tons, her 8 15-inch guns outrange any British pursuer. Her advanced radar spots aircraft before they can spot her, and her compartment design makes her virtually unsinkable. Bismarck races toward the safety of occupied France, with the world's largest navy on her heels. But a small wound betrays the pride of the Kriegsmarine. A trail of oil follows her, and the British planes are close behind. The Crown Jewel. On February 14, 1939, cold winds swept over the Elbe River as workers, officers, and dignitaries gathered along the slipways at Blumenvoss in Hamburg. At the center of all the fanfare stood the unfinished hull of Germany's newest battleship, the Bismarck, prepared to enter the water for the first time after nearly 3 years of construction. Dorothee von Lohenfeld, granddaughter of Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor, whom the ship was named after, stepped forward to break a bottle of champagne across the bow and officially give the ship her name. Adolf Hitler himself addressed the crowd with a short, prepared speech, marking the launch of the latest national milestone. Though Bismarck was presented to the world as a treaty-compliant design, when fully loaded, she displaced more than 50,000 tons, far exceeding the 35,000-ton limit. Her dimensions matched her ambitions: 823 feet long, a beam of 121 feet, and a range of over 10,000 nautical miles. Upon her eventual commissioning in August 1940, Kapitänsersee Ernst Lindman, a career officer with a reputation for discipline and loyalty, took command of Bismarck and her more than 2,200-man crew, including more than 1,960 enlisted sailors. Though Hitler and the Kriegsmarine needed her operational fast, trials revealed a troubling flaw. Bismarck was nearly impossible to steer using her engines alone. As engineers worked to solve this major problem, a series of logistical setbacks, like a wreck in the Kiel Canal, ice-choked waterways, and overcrowded docks, kept the ship confined for weeks, with skipper Lindman growing increasingly frustrated as the months slipped away for him and his pier-bound crew. Operation Rheinübung. By the time Bismarck was finally ready for war in mid-1941, Germany's broader Atlantic strategy was unraveling. The battlecruisers Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, both veterans of earlier commerce-raiding missions, were damaged and stranded in Brest, while Tirpitz, Bismarck's nearly identical sister ship, was still being outfitted in Wilhelmshaven. Most importantly, the Kriegsmarine couldn't match the Royal Navy in open battle, leading Grand Admiral Erich Raeder to push for limited commerce raiding instead. Bismarck's first-ever mission, Operation Rheinübung, was designed around this strategy. Germany's crown jewel would break into the Atlantic, avoid direct engagement with capital ships, connect with supply ships positioned in advance, and begin targeting Allied convoys with impunity. With the rest of the fleet sidelined, the operation was no longer a show of strength, but a bold gamble. Even Fleet Chief Gunther Lütjens wanted to wait until reinforcements could join, but Berlin made its decision. Bismarck would sail, no matter what. At last, on May 18, 1941, Bismarck slipped away from Gotenhafen under gray Baltic skies, joined by heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen and a trio of destroyers. Overseeing it all was high-ranking Admiral Gunther Lütjens. The breakout plan hinged on slipping past British power without being detected. The English Channel was out of the question, as it was too narrow, too exposed, and constantly under surveillance. This left the northern route, sailing along the coast of neutral Norway. Bismarck could use poor weather and long spring nights for cover. From there, the goal was to pass through the Denmark Strait, one of the last gaps in Allied air and naval coverage, and reach the open Atlantic. From there, Bismarck would begin attacking convoys at will, with the final destination of the port of Brest, where Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, once finished, would eventually join in for a larger follow-up operation. On the 20th, the squadron passed through the Kattegat Strait, but they weren't unnoticed. Around midday, the Swedish cruiser Gotland, operating as a scout ship, spotted the German force and passed the sighting up the chain. By evening, that report had made its way to London, but not before Bismarck herself intercepted the message. Admiral Lutyens quickly relayed the development to German Naval Command, but remained set in his ways and refused to enforce full radio silence, even on an operation as sensitive as this. The following day, RAF pilot Flying Officer Michael Suckling, alone in his Spitfire at 26,000 feet, crossed directly over the German squadron and captured high-altitude photos of Bismarck and Prince Eugen. With visual confirmation, Admiral John Tovey placed the home fleet on full alert. Ships Hood, Prince of Wales, and 6 destroyers were ordered to intercept from Iceland. As the sun fell that evening and the German squadron departed Bergen, leaving their supply ships behind, Prince Eugen topped off her tanks from the tanker Vullen. Whether due to timing, miscommunication, or overconfidence, Admiral Lutyens chose to press on without replenishing her fuel, a decision he would soon regret. Hidden in the mist. On the morning of May 22nd, the destroyer escorts turned back, their fuel tanks too limited for Atlantic operations. From that moment on, Bismarck and Prince Eugen were sailing alone. Though the weather was worsening, for Lutyens, the fewer eyes on them, the better. Aboard Bismarck, aware that British cruisers might be lurking just beyond the mist, crews finalized preparations for potential action. Anti-aircraft crews drilled in the cold, torpedo rooms ran final checks, and spotters scanned the endless gray for any sign of enemy aircraft. Engineers worked around the clock to monitor the propulsion systems, knowing that even a minor mechanical issue could compromise the breakout. By May 23rd, Bismarck's engines thundered at 27 knots as Lutyens pushed through the Denmark Strait. Morning mist clung to the sea, reducing visibility to just a couple of miles. Despite being close to summer, icebergs loomed without warning, forcing abrupt changes in course and making them zigzag through the frigid waters north of Iceland. At dusk, German radar operators detected a British cruiser 40,000 miles away. It was the heavy cruiser Suffolk, a radio team already broadcasting their position to the Royal Navy. Upon venturing a little too close to the German powerhouse, Bismarck's main batteries erupted, sending 5 salvos flying through the air, 3 of them hitting Suffolk across her decks, before she vanished into a hastily laid smokescreen. The concussion from Bismarck's 15-inch guns was so powerful that they knocked out her own radar, leading Lutyens to order Prince Eugen to move forward and serve as their eyes, then executing a daring 180-degree turn to ambush their pursuers. Suffolk's radar caught the maneuver and countered. This continued through the entire night. Sinking a Royal Navy ship. At 5:45 a.m. on May 24th, 1941, German lookouts aboard Bismarck spotted smoke on the horizon. It was battlecruiser HMS Hood and battleship HMS Prince of Wales, finally on the scene after days of weather delays, their wakes cutting white lines across the dark waters of the Denmark Strait. After putting down his binoculars, Admiral Lutyens ordered battle stations at once. All over the massive ship, men took positions, watertight hatches secured, and gun crews readied their equipment. 7 minutes later, from nearly 28,000 yards out, Hood opened fire. Prince of Wales followed a minute later. The British ships, led by Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland, initially aimed at different targets, with Hood mistakenly focusing on Prince Eugen instead of Bismarck. As Bismarck began to return fire, the British ships closed in straight ahead, using only their forward guns, which could fire, while the Germans, positioned broadside, unleashed full salvos from all their main turrets at the same time. Vice Admiral Holland ordered a turn to the left, hoping to swing the rear guns of Hood into action. Now, focusing all their fire on Hood, Prince Eugen struck first, landing an 8-inch shell that triggered a fire below deck, sending the British crews in a frenzy trying to put it out. Meanwhile, at Bismarck's bridge, the gunnery officers adjusted the control. Finally, after several tries, with the target now locked, Bismarck's main battery of 8 15-inch guns opened up at Hood rapidly, while her secondary 5.9-inch guns simultaneously targeted Prince of Wales. Holland swung his ships left again, but still struggled to match the Germans' position. On cue, Prince Eugen shifted fire, hammering Prince of Wales with fresh hits that sparked flames along her decks. Knowing his advantage, Lutyens repositioned Prince Eugen behind Bismarck, and at exactly 6 a.m., just as Hood made her second turn, Bismarck sent one armor-piercing shell slamming right into her deck, punching through to the aft magazine. Instantly, the ship broke apart between the mast and the funnel. With Hood gone, Bismarck turned her full attention to Prince of Wales. The British ship managed to land a few hits, one flooding a generator room, another punching through the bow, but she was outgunned. When a shell from Bismarck struck the bridge, she had no choice but to turn away. Though skipper Lindman urged a chase, Lutyens refused. On the one hand, the German squadron had a good opportunity to destroy another British battleship, which was quite an achievement. On the other hand, spending more time in the Danish Strait would increase the chances of facing the other ships of the British fleet. It was barely 6:13 in the morning. In just 21 minutes, Bismarck had fired nearly 100 shells. But after 3 hits, the damage to her hull was growing worse, and as she turned south at a slower-than-ever speed, a long oil slick followed in her wake. Mobilize all forces. After their major win, Bismarck escaped into the open sea and soon began heading for Brest in German-occupied France. As she plowed forward through churning seas, at 8:01 a.m. on May 24, 1941, Admiral Lutyens radioed Berlin, quote, "Battlecruiser, probably Hood, sunk. Another battleship damaged. 2 heavy cruisers maintain contact." For a few tense hours, Bismarck seemed to vanish into the Atlantic. Then, a British Sunderland patrol plane spotted a long, dark smear of oil stretching across the surface. Knowing this telltale sign, the pilot radioed the sighting at once, and heavy cruisers Suffolk and Norfolk, still shadowing in the distance, closed in alongside the wounded Prince of Wales. Her crew was frantically working to restore her guns. In London, Churchill received the report and gave a simple order: sink the Bismarck. Within hours, every available ship was redirected to the chase. The home fleet turned at flank speed, still 400 miles away, but steaming hard to intercept. Battleship Rodney left her convoy escort behind and altered course. Light cruisers swept the Denmark Strait. Even the elderly Revenge-class battleships were recalled from convoy duty. 6 battlecruisers and battleships, 2 aircraft carriers, 13 cruisers, and 21 destroyers all followed Bismarck's oil trail. Meanwhile, Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz mobilized all available U-boats, 5 models south of Greenland, to intercept any pursuers, while a second submarine group headed for the Bay of Biscay, preparing a protective screen for Bismarck's arrival in France. As dusk fell on May 24th, Norfolk and Suffolk maintained their shadow at a cautious distance, with Prince of Wales limping behind. Hours later, through driving rain and darkening skies, Swordfish torpedo bombers from carrier Victorious found their target. Under Lieutenant Commander Eugene Esmond's leadership, the outdated biplanes dove through intense anti-aircraft fire. One torpedo struck home, exploding against Bismarck's armored belt. The hit jolted the massive ship, but caused minimal damage. Through the night, Bismarck slipped south, altering course toward France, while the Royal Navy steamed northeast, still convinced she was heading for Norway. Deciding to break radio silence, Admiral Lutyens transmitted a detailed report to Berlin about their whereabouts, and British listening stations intercepted it immediately. Via direction-finding equipment, the Naval Command fixed her position and deduced the objective: Saint-Nazaire, likely to refuel. As she held steady at 21 knots, her damaged bow was flooding asymmetrically, forcing her to burn fuel unevenly just to stay balanced. Miles away, British forces faced their own crisis. Prince of Wales, Repulse, Victorious, and 4 cruisers peeled away from the hunt, their fuel tanks nearly empty. Only King George V, Norfolk, and Captain Philip Bland's destroyers pressed on, shadowing the enemy in worsening weather. From Gibraltar, the 2nd Strike Group surged north. Force H, led by Admiral James Somerville and built around the carrier Ark Royal and battlecruiser Renown, was racing to intercept Bismarck before she could reach the safety of French ports and the protection of the Luftwaffe. At 10:30 a.m. on May 26th, through broken clouds and misty air, a Catalina flying boat spotted Bismarck in her oil trail. Within minutes, Swordfish from Ark Royal confirmed the sighting, and Captain Philip Bland, leading a flotilla of British destroyers, turned his ships toward the enemy. Now, Bismarck, still 690 miles from the French coast, was about to face the full weight of British naval power, converging from all directions. Cornered in the Atlantic, Through driving rain and churning seas, on the afternoon of May 26th, HMS Ark Royal launched 15 Swordfish biplanes at 2:50. However, the pilots had not been warned that fellow Royal Navy asset HMS Sheffield had been sent ahead to shadow Bismarck. They mistook the British cruiser for their target and sent magnetic torpedoes toward her, all of which detonated on contact with the sea or missed entirely. Bismarck pressed on through rising seas, her crew unaware that the next wave of Swordfish was already airborne, this time carrying contact detonation torpedoes. By eerie coincidence, German submarine U-556 happened to pass directly beneath Ark Royal and Renown during their sortie, perfectly positioned for an attack. But with no torpedoes left, the U-boat could do nothing but watch as the enemy blew apart Germany's crown jewel. Just after 8 p.m., the Swordfish found Sheffield again and took their heading. Rain hammering the wings as radar flickered and visibility dropped to almost nothing. 3 aircraft peeled off into the dark, unable to hold formation, while the rest pressed on through the storm. At 8:47 p.m., they finally spotted Bismarck, and anti-aircraft guns opened up at once, filling the sky with fire and thunder as the biplanes dropped low over the waves, weaving through curtains of flak. One torpedo slammed into her midsection with little effect, but then another struck home near the stern, jamming the rudder. Suddenly, the ship that had terrorized the North Atlantic was no longer steering her own course. As the aircraft pulled away, Bismarck violently swung her main battery toward Sheffield, the second salvo sending shrapnel all across her deck, forcing the wounded British ship to lay smoke and vanish into the haze as 4 more salvos roared overhead. Bismarck limped through the waves while British forces closed from all sides. Admiral Tovey, watching the reports come in, swung his force south, aiming to intercept by dawn, when the rising sun would light Bismarck in perfect silhouette. To the north, Norfolk moved in. From the west, Dorsetshire. Behind them, Ark Royal and the rest of Force H trailed just hours away, ready to strike again if needed. Aboard Bismarck, damage control crews worked through gale force winds, trying to free a jammed rudder. Waves crashed over the decks as the ship attempted crude steering by adjusting propeller speed, but it wasn't enough. The storm and the damage were forcing the Bismarck into a slow, sweeping arc, straight toward the incoming British fleet. At 11:40, Admiral Lutyens transmitted his final message to German headquarters, quote, "Ship unmaneuverable. We will fight to the last shell. Long live the Führer." Night changes. An hour after the Swordfish attack, the storm still raged in full force when destroyers Maori and Piorin caught sight of Bismarck through sheets of rain and sea spray. Without hesitation, the latter surged forward alone, lights flashing to declare her Polish colors in vengeance for the carnage in the homeland years before. But the powerful winds made torpedo work impossible, and the ship only traded a handful of shots with the battleship before she vanished into the squall. The sea had scattered the rest of the flotilla. Through the rest of the night, Captain Bland's destroyers hunted in shifts. Cossack, Maori, Zulu, and Sikh darted in and out of range, launching a total of 16 torpedoes, every single one of them missing. Through it all, Bismarck's gunners, running on adrenaline and fumes, held their line, sending shells into Cossack's radio antenna. To help with visibility, in the middle of the night, Admiral Tovey ordered a series of illumination shells to be arced, turning the sky white momentarily and casting long shadows across the waves, and exposing Bismarck's outline to the distant British battleships, all aching for their turn to strike at her. Though the damage was minimal, the exhaustion in the crew was more noticeable than ever. Below deck, soaked, burned, and sleepless, the Germans endured yet another night without rest. As first light approached, Lutyens ordered the Arado 196 float plane aboard her to prepare for launch, carrying the ship's war diary, footage of Hood's destruction, and sealed dispatches, all meant for Berlin. But the catapult was damaged beyond repair during the battle with Prince of Wales. Rather than let the fueled plane become a fire hazard, the crew had no choice but to push it overboard and watch it vanish beneath the waves. At 7:10 on the morning of the 27th, Lutyens sent one last signal, a request for rendezvous with a U-boat. Though nearby U-556 received the assignment, her submerged state meant she never read the call. Gray morning. When morning broke over the Atlantic, with gray skies, high seas, and stiff northwesterly winds, Admiral Tovey delayed the attack until full daylight. As more and more British warships closed in, Tovey issued his final battle plan. The battlecruiser Renown was to stay clear, as her light armor was too similar to the now fallen Hood. Meanwhile, battleship Rodney was cleared to close within 15,000 yards of Bismarck, with freedom to maneuver and fire as she pleased, while the other cruisers and destroyers also took their positions, tightening the net. In the haze, heavy cruiser Norfolk was the first to stumble upon the battered Bismarck, immediately signaling the rest of the fleet. Moments later, lookouts aboard King George V spotted her silhouette only 25,000 yards out. Rodney fired first at 8:47, followed by the flagship only seconds later. Though Bismarck fired back, unable to steer and tossed from side to side by the violent waves, her only successful hit was a slight straddle to Rodney. Right after 9 a.m., Rodney's 16-inch shells smashed into Bismarck's forward superstructure, wiping out her main fire control director, as well as everyone working inside it, including the majority of her senior officers. From one moment to another, the forward gun turrets were damaged, and the aft control post briefly took over before it was also silenced. Heavy cruisers Norfolk and Dorsetshire also joined in with their 6-inch guns. It was only a matter of time before all 4 of Bismarck's main turrets were out of service. First Officer Hans Ulz, now as the highest-ranking officer left alive, rushed from compartment to compartment, shouting the order to scuttle. Open the watertight doors, cease damage control, prepare charges, abandon ship. A shell from King George V tore through the armored belt and detonated in the aft canteen, taking the lives of Ulz and more than 100 officers. Now, it was engineering officer Gerhard Unach who gave the final demolition order, priming the charges and ordering the engine crew to evacuate at once. Rodney closed to within 3,000 yards, firing broadside after broadside into her already battered superstructure, all while King George V stayed back, her shells plunging down through the decks. By 10:20 a.m., both British battleships were nearly out of fuel. Bismarck was listing hard to port, her stern dipping lower by the minute, and Admiral Tovey gave the order to withdraw. When one final torpedo from Dorsetshire struck Bismarck's already flooded port side at 10:35 a.m., she began to roll. 5 minutes later, she was gone. In the 106-minute battle, the Royal Navy fired nearly 2,800 shells and scored hundreds of hits. The next morning, Dorsetshire and Maury plucked 85 and 25 German survivors each from the frigid Atlantic. However, a possible periscope sighting forced Dorsetshire to abandon rescue efforts, with hundreds still struggling in the water. Allied midshipman Joe Brooks dove in to help wounded Germans aboard, including one armless sailor clinging to a rope with his teeth, but Brooks himself nearly became a casualty when the cruiser departed. In the end, British ships returned home with 109 Germans. Later, U-74 rescued 3 men from a dinghy, while the German weather ship Sachsenwald saved 2 more. The Spanish cruiser Canarias found no one. From Bismarck's crew of over 2,200, only 114 survived. A complete disgrace. As Bismarck slipped beneath the Atlantic, the Luftwaffe remained grounded by fierce weather, completely unable to protect her. When the skies cleared the following morning, German aircrews rushed to their aircraft, determined to exact revenge for Bismarck. A lone Henkel HE-111 found Ark Royal, the very carrier whose swordfish had sealed Bismarck's fate. The aircraft sent bombs around the ship, sending columns of water skyward, but none found their mark. 4 other bombers located the other British battleships, but similarly failed to strike their targets. But the British victory celebration was short-lived. On May 28th, as destroyers Mashona and Tartar limped toward Northern Ireland to conserve dwindling fuel, Henkel swept through broken clouds, striking Mashona. Tartar tried to scuttle her wounded sister with a torpedo, but it failed. Other destroyers soon arrived, finishing Mashona with gunfire, sending her to join Bismarck beneath the Atlantic. The loss stunned Germany, as the nation's most powerful battleship had lasted less than 9 days at sea. Even Prime Minister Churchill later reflected on the importance of the victory, stating, quote, "The sinking of the Bismarck has exercised a salutary influence upon the whole course of the war at sea." Hitler, shaken by the cost of failure, ordered his commanders not to risk any capital ship in direct combat again. Surface operations were frozen, and large warships were kept in harbor, except for limited missions in northern waters. The days of the Kriegsmarine were numbered.